Alright everybody, welcome. Hopefully the stream title worked. Today we are talking Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations. For anybody who's just randomly watching this sometime in the future, we are using the Loeb Classic Library Edition, the one with the Greek on the opposite page. I just love the format of these books, and they have great, slightly classic translations, which just hit me right. And if you ever want to study Greek, now you can learn Greek. Isn't that great? I prefer the Latin ones, obviously, because I speak more Latin. But still, Greek is fun. Okay. So today we're going to jump on into it. Before we get into Marcus Aurelius, we're going to do one slide on some Argumentation Basics, just because I've graded 2 papers in this class so far, and I feel like this is a part that I should go over. It's just healthy to do it, and it can give you an example for later if you're having trouble. Alright. And it looks like it's working. Good. So today, basic argument structure. Let me get my laser pointer. Here we go. The foundation of all good argumentation. And it doesn't matter field. I don't care if you're in an ethnic study, or if you're in history, or you're in English, or you're in a science. You have to have all of these. Yeah, social science doesn't matter. You need claims, you need reasons, and you need evidence. This is the fundamental structure of all truth-based thinking. When you're trying to prove truths about reality, you need to have this structure. Just claims is politics, just reasoning is like solipsistic logic classes, and just evidence is like bad Wikipedia articles, I guess, or just like a data bank with no massaging or no understanding. So these three need to go together. Now, let's break it down a little bit, though. I realize I said this to a bunch of people, but maybe it might not have clicked fully. So I want to give you guys a little recapitulation here. So first, a claim. What are you asserting, right? So you have to actually claim something about reality. You're claiming something is true. You are not just claiming. Does that make sense? You're trying to claim a thing you think is seemingly true about reality. So, for any claim to work, it needs a level of disagreement, right? It needs something where the answer's not obvious. Let me give you an example. This is not a claim. Korea is a peninsula. Now, why is this not a claim? Because a peninsula is a piece of land surrounded on 3 sides with water, which definitionally Korea is. The only person that would argue this is a pedant, somebody who tries to use their reason to just say, a peninsula actually means whatever I want it to mean. That you don't argue with that person. You can't argue with that person, because that person doesn't even concede language works, so argumentation can't happen, right? That's not a person you argue with. Anybody who gets too pedant about words, they can't be reasoned with. Right, this structure can't work on them. They're not interested in truth. They're interested in being God of words, right? You can't do anything with them. For almost all of humans, in almost all of history, and by almost all, I mean a vast majority, like vanishingly small percentage would fight over stupid words like this. This is just a statement of fact. It is not a claim. Now, that's great, right? Statement of fact, right, Professor? Yes, but you can't write a paper about it. Right? Why would anybody read a paper about, like, Korea is a peninsula? Peninsulas have water on 3 sides. Water on 3 sides means it's a peninsula. Right? Like, that's just show me a picture or something. We're done. Right? You don't have to keep going into it. Again, it's irrelevant. So, claims like this aren't useful in an argument sense, or trying to dialectically find truth sense. If it's too obvious, or it's just a statement of fact, it's not a claim. Now, what would be a claim? Let me give you an example. Korea is the most important strategic location in Northeast Asia. How is this a claim? Well, anywhere could be a strategic location, right? We're talking about like politics and war. But this became specific as soon as you assert here. Here's the assertion, right? Right here. Korea is the most important strategic location in Northeast Asia. So more important than Manchuria, more important than China or Mongolia or Russia or Japan. So, right, this is a claim where we can now have an argument. Because I'm both saying, what's my claim? Most important strategic location, right? So suddenly we're having a strategic level argument about Korea. Now, this is cooking with fire, right? Now, what's a reason? Well, how do I apply reason to this? Well, it's the logical reasons you assert such a claim, right? So you're building a logical structure. Generally speaking, it does have to tie into some philosophy. And when I say generally, always, right? Your philosophy can't, even if your philosophy is just, I like it. That's actually philosophy. I have that guy's book, actually. Hold on. It makes me feel good is actually a philosopher. Hold on, let me get my books out. He's at the bottom of my stack here. His name's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, On the Social Contract and Other Writings. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's whole ethical system, by the way, the guy who inspired the French Revolution, at least partially, was just like, if it feels good, it's morally right. Even that is already a philosophical position. It's not reasonable, but it's a position. So, let me give you an example of how you could do this. It'd be like saying something like, firstly, the physical location itself gives some indicators of Korea's significance being between two world powers for the last 1,000 years, and then I keep arguing, right? Like, because it's between China and Japan and Russia, horse Mongolian nomad guys, that location itself, before any proof, can indicate just reasonably that even if I didn't have proof for it, logically speaking, it would be a place that sounds important, right? And in contrast to what? In contrast to, say, Japan, which is surrounded by the water, which is mostly secure. So even though it's secure, it doesn't make it the most strategic location. Or compared to Kamchatka, which is Russia's Alaska, right? Could you argue Kamchatka's the most important strategic location? You could, but it wouldn't be as compelling as Korea, and here's my reasons. So this is your reasoning. It's not fully divorced from your claim or your evidence, but this itself isn't evidence, right? This is me constructing reasons why my claim is true. And finally, evidence is proof. And we already talked about this, right? Proof is either philosophical or empirical proofs that are true, right? They're true as in they follow from your logic, or they're true that they're empirical, right? They're observed truths about reality. So we've been dealing with a lot of philosophy books, right? So a lot of the evidence in our books will be philosophical proofs. That's fine, right? That's what we're literally doing in our class. But also you can have empirical proofs. So any of you who compared, Plato to modern America, right? That's you trying to use empirical proofs to support your claims. And what would be the evidence part of this? Right here. The wars of the 19th and 20th centuries, which happened in Korea, reinforce this. The Sino-Japanese, the Russo-Japanese, the China War, and the Korean War all clearly show ... Right? So then I can make an argument that these four wars, these are historic wars, by the way, all within 60 years of each other, where people fought in Korea over who got to control Korea and that area. But Korea played a central role in all of these. So suddenly now I'm making a evidence-based argument that has logical reasons and a big claim. This is what I'm asking you to do. Now, why did I use a historical example? Because the philosophical ones are what you guys are supposed to be doing. But it's not that hard, right? Literally, if you replace words here, you get a claim, right? Like, Plato's Republic is the most important political idea in the Western tradition. Boof! Bam! I made an argument. That, and many of you would disagree with that because I read your papers, right? But it's great because people would disagree with it. Now, the more outstanding your claim is, the harder it is to prove. And the more moderate your claim is, the easier it is to prove, but also the less impressive it is. So you have to figure out what kind of a claim you're going to make. We even see this in our, you can see this in books about these subject areas too. For example, saying Plato's guardian organization is literally communism. That's actually a claim, right? It's not a description of fact. You have to argue with me, why is that communism? It just sounds like a very communal thing. Are all communities communism? What about before communism existed? Does communism go back in time? That doesn't make sense. But anyway, right? So something like that, you have to argue it. So, all right, any questions about this before we jump into meditations? But I wanted to give you an example so you can go back and look at this if you're having trouble with it in your future papers. And then you can use it as a basis to ask me more questions. I will give it 30 seconds if anybody has any questions or wants elaboration. And anybody who wants to wonder, how do I get better at reasoning, Professor? Well, lucky you, We are actually studying some of the most logical fellows in all of human history. Confucius is pretty good. Mencius is great. Plato might be the most logical of all time. Even if you don't like him, it doesn't mean his reasoning is bad. You just might not like his claims or his evidence. But his logic is pretty much bulletproof. You just have to not like his, what would I say it? His warrants or assumptions. We haven't talked about warrants and assumptions yet. But by the end of the semester, we'll talk about those too. But I don't want to overwhelm you guys too early. But I will give you some of the truth drops from my senior level class. I don't mind giving it to freshmen if it helps you guys for the next 4 years. Or let's be honest, you're honor students. You could probably do it in 3 years. All right. Great. Let's keep going. I don't see any questions popping up. So back on topic. Back to meditations. And let me get all my notes out. Oh, I need a bigger desk, man. 2 desks. Yeah. Nah, this probably won't last long enough to justify that. But anyway, here are my Marcus Aurelius notes. Okay. So let us start again. And we got to book 1. So let us continue. Unless anybody thinks we did book 2. I don't think we did. All right. So, jumping right in. Book two, section 1 right away. I love this. This shows you, like, kind of stoicism as a regular rule, right, of how do you live your life. It says, say to thyself at daybreak, I shall come across the busybody, the thankless, the overbearing, the treacherous, the envious, the unneighborly. All this has befallen them, because they know not good from evil. But I, in that I have comprehended the nature of the good, that is the beautiful, and the nature of evil, that is the ugly, and the nature of the wrongdoer himself, that is akin to me, not as partaker in the same blood and seed of the intelligence of a morsel of divine, can neither be injured by any of them, for no one can involve me in what is debasing. Nor can I be wroth with my kinsman and hate him. Bang. Now, why did I read a bunch of that? It gives you a huge part of the Stoic philosophy in one little paragraph. And it tells you a lot of stuff, right? It tells you what the negative stuff he'll come across. A busybody, right? Somebody who's a gossip and in other people's business. The thankless, right? Somebody who has no gratitude. The overbearing. Someone who is, I was going to say something like a Karen, but it's somebody who is forcing themselves too much in other people's business. Treacherous. Obviously, treachery is a negative, right? The envious, people who want other people's stuff. The unneighborly, people who aren't good neighbors. And they mention, how would this happen to them? Well, because you're Stoic, like Marcus is, you would then know that if you have the good, if you comprehend the good, you couldn't be evil. And he understands the divine, so he can't be injured by any of them. This goes back to that question somebody asked before about kind of the enthroned divinity of man. This is the basic Stoic idea. You can't be involved in anything immoral if you do not wish to be, no matter what happens else externally to you, and you can't be injured by them. And when we say injured, think here, we're talking moral injury or long-lasting spiritual injury, not like somebody can't stab you. Stoics didn't think they're invincible. Stoics thought their inner lives are disconnected from their outer lives if they wish it to be. That is what they believe. All right. And then here too we get something called the first rule of nature. Throughout this book we slowly get kind of the rules of the system. And the first rule of nature is here. There's a certain amount of cooperation that is natural for Stoics, even though this is one of their, not contradictions, but one of their kind of, people who don't like them would call it a contradiction. But a Stoic would just say it's acknowledgement of reality. So basically Stoics are also kind of universalist, or they believe in the unity of humans. Because he says this here, for we have come into being for cooperation, as have the feet, the hands, the eyelids, the rows of upper and lower teeth. Therefore, to thwart one another is against nature, and to thwart one another by shewing resentment and aversion. So, slowing down other humans is against nature, and so is trying to thwart is stop someone by showing resentment or aversion. So Stoics both think you should cooperate and don't think you should cause more friction, right? If you're already in a friction-full place, but your inner life is good, don't start causing friction with others, because you're doing the same problem. That's basically it. So again, we're starting to get to these, this is where we start to get the core principles. And then number 2, literally, we get the next one. These do link, right? There's an elaboration here. So reason over flesh. This is my subtitle, right? So he says, this that I am, whatever it be, is mere flesh and a little breath, and the ruling of reason. Away with thy books. Be no longer drawn aside by them. It is not allowed. But as one already dying, to stay in the flesh, it is not but gore and bones and network of compact nerves and veins and arteries. Look at the breath too, the sort of thing it is, air. And not even that always the same, but every minute belched forth, and again gulped down. Then thirdly, there's the ruling reason. This is where we get that theory about, put thy thought thus, thou art an old man. Let this be a thrall no longer, no more a puppet, pulled aside by every selfish impulse, nor let it grumble any longer at what is allotted to it in the present, or dread in the future. So Stoic's not supposed to worry that much about flesh, right? It's just flesh, get over it. And the emotion is here. You're not supposed to be a puppet to your flesh, don't be a thrall to it. Don't be pulled aside by selfishness, so they're against selfishness too, right? They're not good libertarians. And then let it grumble not any longer what is allotted to it. So again, allotted means chosen for it, right? Allot is when you pull a name out of a hat, right? So don't let your allotment change your temperament. It's just what you've been allotted is. Don't worry about it. Again, this goes back to they do believe in destiny, too. All right. And we got 3 strong ones in a row here, so I'm just going to keep going. Number 3, we get a note of providence. 3, full of providence are the works of the gods, nor are fortune's works independent of nature, or the woven texture of the interlacement of all that is under the control of providence. Thence are all things derived, but necessity too plays a part in the welfare of the whole universe, of which thou art a portion. And then he goes more to explain nature and the wholeness of nature and how it brings apart changes. And he says, let these reflections suffice thee if thou hold them as principles. And just he mentions it too. Don't read too much, die grateful in the heart of God. Interesting. So here we go, right? We're getting more sophist elaboration. They talk about providence, they talk about necessity, welfare of the universe. So this is starting to get some of the unity principles, but also the idea there is providence, right? Providence is like the movement of the plan of God's plan of the universe. Now that's a little more like Christian in conception, as we'll get to a little later. For the Stoics, nature, the universe, and God are all interchangeable. That doesn't mean there's not providence for Stoics, it just changes it, right? So it's more interrelated and more unified. All right, next. He talks about choosing good every hour. This is 5, I think. Let me see. Yeah, every hour make up thy mind sturdily as a Roman and a man, to do what thou hast in hand with scrupulous and unaffected dignity, and to love, and the love of thy kind, and independence and justice, and to give thyself rest from all other impressions. So here we go. So you're always supposed to choose the good thing. And they say, and this even mentions what you should get rid of in yourself. Divest thyself of aimlessness and all passionate antipathy of the convictions of reason, all hypocrisy and self-love and dissatisfaction with thy allotted share. There it comes again. Thy allotted share. And for the gods also will ask no more of him who keeps these precepts. So we're starting to get like the precepts, right? Like what are the pillars of Stoic thought? And this is where we're starting to get it, right? So we're starting to understand how Stoics judge action and life. All right, the next one. Hold oneself to a standard. I'm trying to find the part of this I liked. There's so many of these that deal with it. I'll click here. Okay. Man, I skipped so many good ones. I'm reading my notes. Okay, let's see. Oh, wrong bookmark. My goodness. I was about to read something. I'm like, book 5. Ah, wrong place. I'm just flipping forward. Nope, these are all good. We get more elaboration on the universe and the gods. How to have a proper attitude towards the universe, like how quickly, this is 12, all things vanish away. In the universe, their actual bodies, the remembrance of eternity, and what character all objects sense, and particularly those that entice us with pleasure or terrify us with pain, our acclaimed vanity. Don't worry about stuff, it's going away. Very fatalistic. And I think I skipped ahead of this a little bit. That's fine. So this one is just an elaboration, which I already mentioned actually, is just keep yourself to any standard. This is a big deal. And they have specifics in their standard, right? Focusing on self-betterment, I think this was 7. Make leisure for thyself learning some good thing more, and cease being carried aside hither and thither. But wherewith must thou take heed of one error. So correct yourself. For there are triflers, but their activities are worn out of life without ever having to aim. So make sure to hold yourself to standards. Next one, we already kind of talked about this. The nature of the universe, a bunch of this section talks about this. Let's see, 35, where is that? And we get a little bit more of the unity here too. Yet, this is 11. The nature of the whole could not have been guilty of an oversight from ignorance, or cognizant of these things through lack of power to guard against and amend them. Nor could it have gone so far amiss, either from inability or unskillfulness, to allow good and evil to fall without distinction alike upon the evil and the good. Still, it is a fact that death and life, honor and dishonor, pain and pleasure, riches and penury, being poor, do among men, one and all, betide the good and the evil alike, being in themselves neither honorable nor shameful. Consequently, they are neither good nor evil. This one's interesting. So, if you observe physical reality, right, good and bad things are given to, things that are seemingly good and bad are given to good and bad men alike. His point was, those aren't good or bad, they're just things. Interesting theory. Finally, this shows you the Stoics' attitude to kind of external reality, which we also talked about a little bit. I didn't just make it up, right? Where's 18? It's 15, right. Oh yeah, this is a short one, but it's great. Remember that everything is but what we think of it. For obvious indeed is the saying fathered by the Momenius the Cynic, obvious to the utility of what was said, if one accept the gist of it as far as it is true, which is that everything is but what we think of it. So for a Stoic, they don't actually think that physical reality doesn't matter. They just don't think it can affect you. Because 16, they say right here, the soul of the man does wrong to itself, then most of all, when it makes itself, as far as it can do so, a posthume and as it were a malignant growth of the universe. So the only way you can hurt yourself, the only way you can hurt yourself is by you doing it to yourself. Nothing else can harm you. It's a very interesting theory of time in the universe. I skipped this one, the every moment being considered, although I already read something like that already, just the basic point that Stoics had a very fatalist view of time, but for them, they would say it was positive, which is you should live every moment like it's the last moment. In this chapter, they mention there's not a difference between 3,000 years or your current lifespan, right? If you lived immorally, it wouldn't matter how long you live. So for a Stoic, you should consider every moment, and that moment you should live well. And then the time of your life won't matter that much. Okay. Any questions or things you think I missed in this one? There's a lot of good stuff in all these chapters. Even 17, I didn't really bring up 17, and 17 has a lot of good points. I didn't bring it up on the slide. And talking about every moment, 17 starts with this. Of the life of man, the duration is but a point. Substance streaming away, its perception dim, the fabric of the entire body prone to decay, the soul a vortex, and fortune incalculable, and fame uncertain. In a word, all things of the body are as a river, and the things of the soul as a dream and a vapor, and life is a warfare and a pilgrim sojourn, and fame after death is only forgetfulness. And then he said, what can help us? One thing, philosophy. And then this is where we get the first divine genius quote, actually, I think. And this consists of keeping the divine quote-unquote genius within pure and unwronged, Lord of all pleasures and pains, doing nothing aimlessly or with deliberate falsehood and hypocrisy, independent of another's action or inaction. And this is important too for a Stoic. Furthermore, welcoming what happens and is allotted, again that word is back, allotted, issuing from the same source, whether it be from what man himself has issued, above all waiting for death, with a good grace, as being but setting free the elements of which every living thing is made up. Yeah, so that's 17 if you're curious. 17 is a good little, generally the end of his chapters have good summaries of the chapter. So that's kind of the summary of Stoic enthronement. Somebody asked a good question. At this time, was there a defined group of Stoics, as in actively knew they had an ideology and tried to get others to follow it, or because of Aurelius' personal writing, Stoicism wasn't exactly yet named, more of a general idea? No, it was an active philosophy. Again, I can't say popularity, but there was a lot of writers in the field. There's people who followed it. For sure. It was a well-known school of philosophy. It's the Greco-Roman world, right? So it's not the only school. Probably the biggest school is Neoplatonism. There's a couple other big ones, too. Epicureans, Stoics, Cynics. So there's several schools of philosophy / religion you can kind of join. It's kind of like this. If you get into it, Stoicism really is a religion, but it's imagine the Roman world had their gods, right? The pantheons, we'll call them the civic pantheons. So you had to acknowledge their gods, but then your interpretation of it was your philosophy. So you could be a Platonist, right? Somebody who follows Plato. You could be a Stoic, somebody who follows Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. You could be a Cynic, where you just don't think reality exists at all. Oh, so like you pick your interpretive school basically, and then they're public, right? People knew about them and read about them and picked them. So yeah, it's a good question. But yeah, it was well known by this time. I would argue probably Marcus Aurelius is the peak of it, and then after him it declines. Why? Basically it competes with Christianity and loses. And for anybody here who grew up Christian, some of the ideas in here can sound familiar. Why would that be? Some Stoic ideas were like considered like good interpretations and then like reincorporated into Christian life, especially monastic life. So interesting. But yeah, it's a great question. Very prevalent. That's the answer. Great question. All right, let's keep going. Book 3. How are we doing on time? Man, class always goes faster than I expect. Oh, that's good. That means I'm prepared. Okay, book 3. Let's get on in it. Move my notes. Here we go. Book 3. All right, so immediately book 3, we get how do we judge the quality of life then? If life is all in your head, or what matters about your life is morality, your personal actions, and then your inner life, then 1 gives us some more elaboration on this. We ought to not think only upon the fact that our life each day is waning away, that is left of it being ever less. But this also should be a subject for thought, that even if life be prolonged, yet as it is uncertain whether the mind will remain equally fitted to the future understanding of facts, for the contemplation which strains after knowledge of things divine and human. For if man entered upon his dotage, there would still be power of breathing. There will still be his power of breathing, digestion, and thought and desire, and all such faculties. Then full use to himself, the accurate appreciation of items of duty, the nice discrimination of what presents itself to the senses, and a clear judgment on whether it is time for him to end his own life, and all such decisions as above inquire well-trained powers of reasoning. So there's a certain life quality for a Stoic. The introduction mentions suicide briefly, but here Marcus actually mentions it specifically. If you're a older person, what's the line for like, when should I just end it? For him, it's when you have all your faculties. If you're in your dotage, right, your old age, and you have your full faculties, live, right? You can live well. It doesn't matter when your end is coming. But if you're living badly, might be a time to end it. So again, they're not anti-suicide. It would just depend when you did it. And then everything basically, for the win, number 2 has this. I don't have it on the slide, but he mentions that everything should be done in judging against nature. Because he makes a point, just because something looks old, or he gives a bunch of examples of things that could look like unintended, but they're good. He mentions like ripeness of fruit, a wild boar foaming, or what was the other one? Bread cracking when you cook it. He's like, those are all good things. So just because something old doesn't mean it's not suitable for nature's purpose. He says, if a man has sensibility and a deeper insight into the workings of the universe, scarcely anything, though it exists only as a secondary consequence of something else, will seem to him to form its own particular way pleasing adjunct to the whole. So this is where he makes an argument that you should be able to appreciate everything in the universe, because if there's a unifying nature to it, you can appreciate it. All right. Another interesting point he makes here is on great men. Let me see this. It's number 3. Great men die like lesser men. He gives a bunch of examples of people who die. Like he mentions Alexander, Pompeius, and Gaius Caesar, times without number, utterly destroyed whole cities and cut to pieces many myriads of horse and foot in the field of battle, yet the day came when they too departed this life. And he says, what of this? Thou hast gone abroad, thou hast set sail, thou hast touched land. Go ashore, if indeed for another life there is nothing even there void of gods. But if it's a state of non-sensation, thou shalt cease being at the mercy of pleasure and pain, and lacking the body vessel, which is so much baser than which the masters of it. And again, we get the divine genius one more time. For the one is intelligence and divine genius, the other dust and putrescence. So again, Stoics aren't divorced from the tradition they're in. What I mean is they're in the Greek and Roman world, right? That sure sounds like Aristotle or Plato. The idea that there's like this soul that transcends, the mind transcends your body. The whole discussion about emptiness or, spending time with the gods, that's literally from Socrates. And he mentions Socrates later. So all of these people are in the same stream, right? Just like Confucius, Mencius are in a stream. Plato, Marcus Aurelius, and eventually when we get to St. Augustine, they're all in the same stream, right? This is a civilizational stream, and it's good to see that. Next one. I love this. Fritter not away what is left of your life in thought of others. I had to just quote the book because it's so good. So it does say, fritter not away what's left of life in thoughts of others, unless thou canst bring these thoughts into relation of some common interest. And he says, don't worry about what other people are doing unless it has wider significance. And he says, keeping close watch over thine wheeling rule of reason. We ought therefore to eschew the aimless and the unprofitable in the chain of our thoughts. Still more all that is over-curious and ill-natured. And man should accustom himself to think only about which, if one asks all of a sudden, what now is my thoughts? Thou couldst quite frankly answer once this or that. So don't waste your time thinking of kind of useless things or worrying too much about other people's business. He says, for in truth such a man, one who no longer puts off being reckoned now, if never before, among the best, is some sort of priest and minister of God's, putting to use also that which, enthroned with him, keeps man unstained by pleasures, invulnerable to all pain, beyond the touch of any wrong, proof against evil, a champion of the highest champions, that never being overthrown by any passion, died in grain with justice, welcoming all his soul everything that befalls and allotted him, and seldom, yet not without great general necessity, concerning himself with the words and thoughts of another. And it keeps going. But he makes this point, don't worry too much about other people, right? If you have your, mental palace, basically, right? If you're enthroned in your own mind, only worry about other people as they relate to nature and the universals, right? That matters. But in specifics, don't waste a bunch of your thought worrying about other people. And this, again, even if you're not a Stoic, you could argue in wider significance. This is actually probably pretty good, just psychological advice. Right? Psychology is not really a new field. The ancients all did psychology too. They just didn't understand why you'd separate it from philosophy. That's stupid. Basically, in the last 200 years, the West, we've tried to subdivide every field to such a degree that we have 20 fields that all do basically the same thing. And linked to this, I'm about to sneeze. 1 second. Oof. And this is actually the next one in row. Don't be superfluous with words or deeds. I love it. He says, do that thou neither unwillingly nor selfishly nor without examination nor against the grain. He says, don't dress in too fine clothing. Be not superfluous in words or deeds. And he says, moreover, let the God that is in thee be Lord of a living creature that is manly and of full age and concerned with statescraft, and a Roman, and a ruler who hath taken his post, as one who awaits the signal of recall from life in readiness, needing no oath nor any man as his voucher. Again, he's talking about that throne. That's the mental throne. It's a huge theme in this book. It just keeps coming back, keeps coming back. This, you need to enthrone yourself on your own throne. Be a Roman. And when they say be a Roman, you guys might be like, what the heck does it mean by be a Roman, right? So this is, remember, he's writing, and it's in Greek, by the way. Half the Roman Empire spoke Greek. Marcus Aurelius, I'm sure, wrote this in Latin. However, the only major copies remaining are Greek copies. Why? Well, the Eastern Empire collapsed, or the Western Empire collapsed, and the Greek half of the empire kept all the books alive for another 1,000 years. So a lot of Latin books we only have from Greek. It's like nowadays, a lot of Chinese books you can only study from Japan. Interesting how that happens in life. But yeah, so don't waste words and deeds, is what he's saying. Being a Roman is, Romans were focused on honor and bravery, and a lot of the kind of traditional traits we think of would be Roman traits. So for him, it's a shorthand. Romans weren't too concerned about material, focusing on honor and war and that kind of thing. All right, let's see. Next, what is best? This is a good one. He gives us a list, actually. Where is my list? Yeah, 6. Here we go. Yeah, these are all right in a row. If indeed thou findest the life of man a better thing than justice, than truth, than temperance, than manliness. These are all those traits we were just talking about. In a word, then thy mind satisfaction with itself things wherein it shows thee acting according to true dictates of reason, within destiny that is allotted thee apart from thy choice. If I say thou seest anything better than this, turn to it with all thy soul, and take thy fill of the best, and thou findest it. And again, we get this enthroned deity. This is the kind of theme of Book 3, actually, if you're curious. The next paragraph says, but if there appears nothing better than the very deity enthroned in thee, which has brought into subjection to itself and individual desires, which scrutinizes the thoughts and the words of Socrates, has withdrawn itself from all the enticements of the senses, brought itself into subjection to the gods, cherishes fellow feeling for men, if thou findest everything else pettier, and of less account than this, give place to naught else, to which thou art but one plucked inside. Incline hereto, never more shalt thou be able without distraction to give paramount honor to that good which is thine own particular heritage. So again, this kind of explains what are better things. We get like a little moral list. And again, right, he mentioned Socrates, like I said. But also, this is the, I guess you'd call the appeal of Stoicism, right? There's basically, because it's pantheist, right, like God is everything and everything is God. By the way, that's technically heresy for Christians, if you're curious. But for the ancient world, it's appealing, right? You set yourself are divine. If you wonder why it's still popular, this might be a reason. There's actually been several Stoic comebacks, specifically since the Renaissance. The Renaissance had a couple big ones, and then in the last 50 years or so, especially tech entrepreneurs really like Stoicism. My guess would be it has something to do with they spend their whole lives creating imaginary worlds. It's easy for them to believe that their own imaginary world is also valid. So it makes sense. All right. And then we get to greatness. Let me find this. How did I lose this? 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, here we go. This is 11. Great. So greatness tied to ability to see the broad view. So, to stand by is mentioned yet another, that definition or declination should be made of every object that presents itself. We may see what sort of thing it has in its essence, stripped of its adjuncts, separate, whole taken as such, to tell over ourselves both its particular designation and the names of the elements that compose it. Here we go. For nothing is so conductive to greatness of the mind as the ability to examine systematically and honestly everything that meets us in life, and to regard these things always in such a way as to form a conception of the kind of universe they belong to and the use for which things in question subserves in it, and the value it has for the whole universe, and for man, citizen as he is of the highest state, of which all other states are but households, what it actually is, and compounded what elements, and likely to show how long. And then he says, what virtue calls for me, such as gentleness, manly courage, truth, fidelity, guilelessness, independence, and the rest. And then he says, this is what you should be thinking. This has come from God, and this is due to the conjunction of fate and the contexture of the world's net web, and some such coincidence or chance. While that comes from It could come from a clansman, a kinsman, a neighbor. And he says, but I am not ignorant, therefore I treat him kindly and justly, in accordance with the natural law of neighborliness. At the same time, of things that are neither good nor bad, my aim is their true worth. So it's this idea that you can see reality in a broad universal sense if you're a Stoic, and you can understand the place of everything, even seemingly bad things. So all things have their place. Now again, if this sounds familiar, it should. I mean, remember, this is contemporaneous to Christianity, and it's coming out of a Greek foundation, right? So this idea that things have purposes outside themselves is very Aristotelian and Platonic. That the things have external purposes in the universe, and if you understood them, you can understand the truth about the universe. Remember forms and matter we talked about with Plato a bit, the cave metaphor and all that? That's this kind of thing, right? It's the idea. The Stoics don't disagree, right? They're saying, okay, we can understand truth about the universe. So what they're arguing about is like, what is God and what is our relation to it, and how much are we in eternal minds, or how much are we the external things that we do? This is the thing they're arguing about. But you can kind of see like, we're working in this kind of uniform tradition. Also, from Stoics is where we get a heavy focus on. Oop, that was bad. Oh, good. I just kicked my router. I gotta set my room up better. Oh, I get antsy teaching sitting down. I really should get a standing desk. But anyway, from Stoics we also get axioms. Axioms are just like short arguments that you can memorize and use for actions. And Stoics believe you should always have axioms ready to go. I think this is 13. Let me see. Yeah. They mention that just as a physician keeps their instruments always ready, keep your axioms ready to go, basically. That's what you want. Where is that? Keep thine axioms ready for the diagnosis of things human and divine. And as we go, we'll get into more of the axioms of kind of Stoic thought. So there's more and more examples as we go forward. All right. And finally, we get a kind of three-part separation. Again, we didn't study Aristotle in this class, but these are actually very Aristotelian, if you break it down. Body, soul, intelligence. This is 16. For the body, sensations. For the soul, desires. For the intelligence, axioms. And this is why axioms are important. And these are philosophical truisms, right? They're things that are true we learn from philosophy. And this is, later we'll get into, Stoics believe anybody could have intelligence and reason. They might not have the same amount of it. So this is where they're separate from Plato. The Stoics were more broad. They thought that anybody could have access to intelligence/reason. How? Through axioms. Basically, if you're not smart enough to reason your way there, you can use the axioms you learned from others, from a tradition, the Stoic tradition, and through that, your own reason can be enthroned in you, even if you're not as intelligent as Marcus Aurelius or Plato or Socrates. So the Stoics were trying to answer the question. This isn't in the book, by the way. This is me giving you the wider context. The Stoics are trying to answer the question of morality. How can more than just like the brilliant rich be fully moral people? And this body, soul, intelligence, where intelligence is axiomatic, this is where we get the Stoic probably their biggest innovation. Or one of their biggest, anyway. Alright, any questions or comments about book 3? Looks like we've got 6 minutes. We'll do book 4. I think we can get through it. I have faith. Where's book 4? Here's book 4. Book 4. Book 4 continued. Fantastic. Man, we might not finish book 4. I have a lot of book 4 notes. Did I do 2 slides of book 4? No, I did 2 slides of book 4. Never mind. We're going to get halfway through my slides on book 4. I'm like, man, I'm making pretty good time. Just kidding. Just kidding. All right, don't see any questions. Let's keep going. Book 4. All right. So building on our previous thing, mastery in accordance with nature. This is just the beginning of 4. That which holds the mastery within us is that which is in accordance to nature. So this is that enthronement we were talking about, right? When that is in accordance with nature, so disposed towards what befalls, then it can always adapt itself with ease to what is possible and granted to us. For it is wedded to no definite material, but though the pursuit of high aims, it works under reservations, yet it converts material for itself into any obstacle it meets with, just as fire when it gets the mastery of what is thrown upon it. A little flame could have been stifled, but blazing fire instantly assimilates what is cast upon it, and consuming it, leaps higher as a consequence. Now, what does this mean for us? Stoics think by being enthroned in your own mind, you adapt yourself to reality better. So whatever is your allotment, whatever happens to you, you can deal with it. And by the way, one of the 3 famous Stoics was a slave. Now, we didn't get that much into slavery in this class, but ancient world slavery and most world slavery, think about it like you're an unpaid member of a family. And when I say family, don't think of like a nuclear Anglo family. Think of like a giant, like South American or a traditional Asian or traditional European family, where like the grandparents live there and the uncles and aunts and all the kids, and it's this giant thing. And then what is a slave? Imagine like when you work for your family and you don't get paid, you just do the work because you're part of the network. That's what the slave is in this setting. So you're a permanent bondservant in someone's home. So you work for them, you serve them, you're part of the family. They might not treat you as good as their kids, obviously, but it's not chattel slavery a la Caribbean or Americans or Islamic slavery, which was also different. But that's a totally different barrel of monkeys that I'm not going to open. But so this is like, you should adapt to your materials. Like, if you're enthroned in your mind, your material situation won't matter, and you're living in accordance with nature. Along with this, take no aimless acts. This is 2. Oh, we're wrong bookmark again. It's a very short one, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. Take no act in hand aimlessly, or otherwise than in accordance with the true principles perfective of the art. And what's the art? The art of Stoicism, right? That's what this whole book's about, Stoicism. And then following up from this, 1, 2, 3, right in a row, we get the kind of the thesis of this chapter. Men seek out retreats for themselves in the country, by the seaside, on the mountains. And thou too art wont to long above all such things. Right? People want to have physical retreats, places where they can go and take it easy. And he mentions, but all this is unphilosophical to the last degree, when thou canst in a moment notice retire into thyself. For nowhere can a man find retreat more full of peace or more free from care than his own soul. Above all, if he have that which is within himself, a steadfast look, at which he is once all good ease, and by all ease I mean nothing other than good order. Make use of this retirement continually, and regenerate thyself. Let thy axioms be short and elemental, such as it, when it is set before thee, will at once rid thee of all trouble, and send away with no discontent at those which thou art returning. So it's basically explaining, this is like your mental fortress. If you get kind of mastery of your reason, you understand the axioms of Stoicism, obviously, right? And truth of the universe and the unity of everything, your best retreat becomes your own mind. All right. And this is what I already talked about this, but I want to point it out again. Intellectual capacity common to all, so is reason. And natural law is also common. This is 4, I think. Yep. If the intellectual capacity is common to us all, common too is the reason, which makes us rational creatures. If so, that reason also is common, which tells us what not to do. If so, the law also is common. So if we are citizens, if so, we are fellow members of an organized community. If so, the universe, as it were, as a state. For what other single polity can the whole race of mankind be said to be fellow members? This is a big innovation. Think about it, right? So it's we get a lot of our modern ideas from this, like a brotherhood, like a men as a community where there's objective reason and law and intellectual capacity. It's a very, as our introduction says, it's a very liberal assumption. Now, it sounds weird. You've probably never heard of the Romans being especially liberal. And liberality means like generous or giving, right? But they were, and especially the Stoicism, like Marcus Aurelius is a famously liberal man, and he murdered a bunch of Christians. Not directly, but the empire did. So this is interesting when we get into somebody's philosophy, and then we get into a little bit of their actions. That we'll talk about a little bit at the end, maybe, because I think it's a good transition to St. Augustine. But we're not there yet. And I'm going to stop here, because I think we're out of time. All right, folks. We're about a half book behind where I want to be, or a book and a half. That's fine, though. It's part of the fun. It means we're covering stuff. So we're free. We're done. For everybody who's here as a regular person, welcome. For the students, don't forget your papers are due this weekend, so check the Dropbox for the due date. But otherwise, have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you all Monday. Have a great week.